You want to know the strangest part, the part nobody believes when I tell it. It's that I wasn't a soldier. I want that on the record before anything else. When the whole thing started, I couldn't have told you which end of a rifle the trouble came out of. I was a janitor, a cleaner, grade 4 sanitation technician, if you want the fancy title they printed on my access badge. I mopped floors. I emptied waste bins. I ran the scrubber drones through the corridors of a research station so far from anything that the nearest star with a name was a 2-week jump away. And by the end of it, 3 galactic empires had a standing order to kill me on sight, and a war that had been grinding along for 400 years actually stopped, because of what got put into my blood by accident on a Tuesday. So no, I wasn't a soldier. That's the strangest part. They turned a man who cleaned toilets into the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, and they didn't even mean to. Let me tell it right from the start. The station was called Medan's Rest. Don't bother looking it up. It's not on any chart anymore. They scrubbed it, and anyway it was never much to look at. Picture a fat gray wheel, half a kilometer across, turning slow in the dark to make its own gravity. Old, cheap. The kind of place built by a species that valued function, and had never once in its history spent a credit on making anything pleasant to look at. I remember the sound of it more than the look, honestly. Every station has a sound, a kind of signature hum, and Medan's Rest had this low 3-note drone, the big drone from the reactor spine, the middle drone from the ring bearings that let the wheel turn, and a high thin whine from the air scrubbers that you only noticed when it stopped. After 3 years, that sound was more familiar to me than my own heartbeat. I could tell you the station's mood from the sound. I could tell when a bearing was going, when a scrubber needed servicing, when the reactor was running hot, all from the way those 3 notes sat against each other. That's the kind of thing you learn when your whole job is keeping a place alive from the inside. That species that built it, the ones I worked for, they were the Ashani. And I should tell you about them, because they're at the center of all of this, and if you don't understand the Ashani, you won't understand anything. The Ashani were scientists. That's not a job to them, it's the whole of what they are. Imagine a people who, thousands of years ago, decided that the pursuit of knowledge was the only thing in the universe that mattered, and then organized their entire civilization around it, top to bottom, and never looked back. They didn't build empires. They didn't fight wars or trade much or care about territory. They built laboratories. Great drifting laboratories out in the deep dark, far from the trade lanes and the borders and the noise, where they could work in peace on the questions that obsessed them. They looked, I'll try to describe them. They looked a little like tall, thin herons. If a heron had 4 arms and skin like gray riverstone and eyes that were entirely black, no white to them at all, deep pools that never seemed to blink. They spoke in a soft clicking murmur that the translators rendered into a flat, patient monotone, and they moved slowly, deliberately, like people who had all the time in the world, because in a sense they did. They lived to be 400 or 500 years old, and they were in no hurry about anything. There's a thing that happens to you, working around people who live 500 years. You start to feel very small and very fast, like a moth flickering around a slow candle. They'd take 3 days to make a decision I'd have made in a second, and I used to find it maddening until I realized it wasn't slowness exactly. It was that they could afford to be careful. When you're going to live 5 centuries, you never have to rush, and you never have to gamble, and you can turn a problem over and over and over until you understand it completely. There's a kind of peace in that, and a kind of loneliness too, I think, though it took me a long time to see the loneliness. And they hired humans. That surprised people when they heard it. It surprised me when I first got the posting. But it made sense once you understood it. The Ashani were brilliant, but they were few, and they didn't like to waste their long, precious lives on menial work. Cleaning, hauling, basic maintenance. The 1,000 small tasks that keep a station running. So they contracted it out to humans mostly because humans were cheap and plentiful and desperate enough to take a posting 2 weeks from the nearest named star. That was us. That was the human staff of Medan's Rest. About 60 of us, scattered through the maintenance decks and the cargo levels and the life support sections, keeping the wheel turning while the Ashani did their incomprehensible work up in the sealed labs where we weren't allowed to go. I'd been there 3 years when it happened, longest posting I'd ever held. And I want you to know I liked it. I liked the quiet. I liked the work. There's a peace in cleaning and taking something dirty and making it right that I've never found in anything else. My whole life I've been the kind of person who feels better after the dishes are done. There's something honest about it. You can see what you did. You leave a place better than you found it, and nobody has to argue about whether you did a good job because it's right there, clean, obvious. I liked my little bunk and my routine and the way the station hummed at night. I wasn't ambitious. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to do my job and be left alone. The universe, it turned out, had other plans. I should tell you a little about who I was before, so you understand what the accident had to work with. I grew up on a colony transit hub, one of those enormous crowded way stations where ships change over and people wait, sometimes for years, for the next leg of a journey to somewhere better. My parents were transit workers. We were poor, and there were a lot of us, and I learned young that the way to survive in a crowded, loud place where nobody has enough is to make yourself small and useful and no trouble to anyone. Don't take up space. Don't make demands. Do your work and keep your head down, and you'll be all right. That was the whole shape of me by the time I was grown. Small, useful, no trouble. I never learned to fight. Not because I was a coward, I don't think, but because fighting was for people who expected the world to give them something, and I'd never expected the world to give me anything. I just wanted to get through it clean, doing honest work, hurting nobody. I mention all this because later people wanted the story to be about a warrior, a secret soldier, somebody who'd been dangerous all along and just needed the right accident to unlock it. And that's not true, and it matters that it's not true. There was nothing dangerous in me. There was a man who cleaned floors and hated conflict and wanted to be left alone. That's the raw material the accident had. That's what got turned into the mind of a war. And I've come to believe that's exactly why it worked, because the war didn't need another warrior. It had 400 years of warriors. What it needed was the opposite. His name was Researcher Vel. That was as much of a name as the translator ever gave me. The Ashani had longer names among themselves, whole strings of cliques that meant things, but to the human staff he was just Vel, and he was the only one of them who ever bothered to learn any of our names in return. Most of the Ashani treated us like furniture. Not cruelly, they weren't cruel, it wasn't in them, but they simply didn't see us. We were part of the station like the air recyclers, useful and unremarkable and not worth a thought. You'd be cleaning a corridor and an Ashani would walk past you close enough to touch and never once acknowledge you existed. You got used to it. You stopped taking it personally after a while. I'll give you an example so you understand what I mean. There was an Ashani researcher, not Vel, one of the others, who I cleaned for every single day for 3 years. Every day. I knew her schedule better than she did. I knew she took her nutrient broth at the 4th hour and left the cup on the left side of her console. I knew she paced when a problem was going badly and went very still when it was going well. I knew her, the way you know anyone whose space you tend to every day. And in 3 years she never once looked at me. Not once. If you'd asked her whether there was a human who cleaned her lab, I genuinely don't think she could have told you. I wasn't a person to her. I was a function the station performed, like the lights coming on. You'd think that would make you bitter, and maybe it did, a little in a low background way. But mostly it just made me invisible, and I'd been invisible my whole life, so it felt like home. But Vel was different. Vel said hello. Vel learned that my name was Cassius Brand Cass to the people who knew me, and he used it in that flat, patient translator voice every time he saw me. Good cycle, Cass. You are well, Cass, small things. But when you've spent 3 years being invisible, small things land like gold. The first time he did it, I actually looked around to see who he was talking to. That's the truth. And Ashani said my name, and my first thought was that there must be another human standing behind me, because Ashani didn't know my name. Ashani didn't know I existed. And I turned around and there was no one there, and Vel was looking at me with those deep black eyes, waiting, and I realized he meant me, and something in my chest did a strange, painful thing that I didn't have a word for at the time. I think the word was just seen. Somebody saw me. It had been so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like. I think Vel was lonely. I've come to believe that looking back. He was old even for an Ashani, and he'd outlived most of the colleagues he'd started his career with, and he worked strange hours in a lab in the quietest section of the station, on a project that the other Ashani seemed to regard with a kind of polite disapproval. He was an outsider among his own people, and maybe that's why he saw me, the human cleaner, when none of the others did. Two outsiders, recognizing something in each other across an enormous gulf. I used to clean his lab, not the inside. I wasn't cleared for the inside, but the antechamber, the airlock, the outer corridor. And Vel would sometimes come out and talk to me while I worked. Not about his research, that was sealed, secret, off limits, just about things. He was curious about humans, in the way a scientist is curious about everything. He asked me about Earth, which I'd never seen. He asked me about music, which fascinated him because the Ashani had nothing like it. That one, the music, we came back to more than once. It genuinely baffled him. The Ashani made no art of any kind. They found the whole idea inefficient, sounds and images that didn't convey information, patterns that existed only to be pleasant. Vel couldn't understand why a species would spend energy on such a thing, so I tried to explain it to him. I hummed him a song once, badly, I'm no singer, an old transit hub song my mother used to sing, and I watched him listen with his head tilted, those black eyes fixed on me, trying to parse it, trying to find the information in it. And finally he said, there is no content, the sounds signify nothing, and yet your heart rate changed while you produced them. Your body reacted as though something meaningful had occurred. He was quiet for a moment. Explain to me what occurred. And I said, nothing occurred. That's the whole point. It just made me feel something. It reminded me of my mother. It made me a little happy and a little sad at the same time. And Vel said, happy and sad at the same time. Those are contradictory states. And I said yes, and he said, how can you be in two contradictory states at once? And I laughed and said, Vel, that's basically the whole human condition. We're always in about 6 contradictory states at once. You get used to it. And he went very still and thoughtful the way he did, and he said, I think that must be very difficult. And I said, it is, but it's also kind of the good part. And he didn't understand, not really, but he wrote it down. He was always writing things down about me. I used to joke that I was his research project too, the little human who felt 6 things at once. Turned out that was closer to true than either of us knew. He asked me once what it felt like to know I would only live 80 or 90 years, and when I told him that mostly I didn't think about it, he went very still and quiet for a long moment, and then he said, that is either great wisdom or great courage. I have not decided which, and I said, or maybe I just don't like thinking about sad things. And he said, that also may be wisdom. And I laughed, and he did the Ashani thing that I'd learned to recognize as their version of a smile, a slow, slight lowering of those black eyes, a softening. And for a moment, across 500 years and 2 species and the whole cold gulf of the galaxy, we were just 2 people talking. I liked Vel. I want that understood too. Whatever came after, and terrible things came after, I never once blamed him. He was a good soul in his strange gray heron way. He was the closest thing I had to a friend on that station. And he was the one who turned me into a weapon, by accident, trying to do the opposite. Now I have to tell you about the war. Because the war is the reason the weapon existed at all. and the reason everyone wanted it so badly once it was loose. Out beyond the quiet deep where the Ashani did their work, the galaxy was on fire. Had been for 400 years. 3 great powers, locked in a war so old that nobody alive could remember why it had started, only that it had never stopped. There were the Corlin Dominion, a militarized empire of squat, armored, brutally practical beings who lived in breathed conquest, whose whole society was a war machine, who measured a life's worth by the battles it had won. There were the Sethiri Ascendancy, cold, elegant, ruthless, a people who fought their wars through technology and calculation and the patient application of overwhelming force. And there was the V-Horn Collective, a vast swarm culture, billions of small hive-linked beings that fought in tides, in oceans, in numbers that no individual could comprehend. 3 powers, 400 years, and a stalemate so complete, so grinding, so total that whole generations had been born and lived and died knowing nothing but the war. It ate everything, every resource, every mind, every hope. The 3 empires poured their entire civilizations into it and none of them could win, because the moment one gained an advantage, the other 2 would ally against it just long enough to tear the advantage away, and then go back to fighting each other. It was a machine that ran on lives and never produced anything but more war. I want you to sit with how long 400 years is. Because we throw the number around, but it doesn't land unless you stop and feel it. 400 years. Every single person fighting that war had a parent who fought it, and a grandparent, and a great-grandparent, back and back and back, further than anyone could count. Not one living soul in 3 entire empires had ever known a day of peace. Peace wasn't a memory. It wasn't even really a concept anymore, not a real one. It was a word in old records, a thing that supposedly existed once, like a color nobody alive had seen. Children were born, grew up, were trained, fought, and died, and the whole arc of their lives happened inside the war, and then their children did the same and their children's children. 400 years of that. 20 generations. The war had stopped being a thing the empires did. It had become the thing they were. I didn't know any of the details back then on the station. The war was far away. It was news, distant news, the kind you have here and don't really take in because it never changes. Another battle, another front, another million dead, the same as last year and the year before and the year before that. It was background noise. The way the station's 3-note hum was background noise. You stopped hearing it. I would come to know it very well. Every battle, every front, every one of those millions of dead, but that came later. And all 3 of them for 400 years had been searching for the same thing. The edge, the advantage. The weapon or the technology or the discovery that would finally break the stalemate and let one of them win. They didn't know it yet, but the thing they'd been searching for 4 centuries was about to be created by accident, in a quiet lab, on a station none of them had ever heard of, and injected into the blood of a man who cleaned floors. Here's what Vel was really working on. I didn't learn the full shape of it until much later, but I'll give it to you now, so the rest makes sense. Vel was trying to end the war. Not through a weapon. That was the beautiful, tragic irony of the whole thing. Vel hated the war, all the Ashani did, in their detached way, the way you'd hate a fire burning down a library. To people who worship knowledge, the war was the ultimate obscenity. 20 generations of minds, trillions of them, every one capable of learning and discovering and adding to the great store of understanding. All of them poured instead into the furnace of a conflict that produced nothing, learned nothing, built nothing. To the Ashani, the war wasn't just terrible. It was wasteful in a way that offended them at the root of what they were. All that mind, all that potential burned for nothing forever. And Vel had spent the last 60 years of his long life on a project he believed might stop it. He was trying to build a thing he called, in the translator's flat voice, a harmonizer, a biological system that could be introduced into a population and would, over time, quiet the aggression that drove the war. Not mind control. He was very clear about that later when it mattered. Not making anyone into slaves or puppets, just turning down the volume on the part of a mind that wanted to destroy, giving people back the ability to choose peace in a galaxy that had forgotten peace was a choice. I asked him about it once, in a roundabout way, before I knew what it was. I asked him why he worked alone, why the other Ashani seemed to disapprove of his project. And he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "My colleagues believe that to alter a mind, any mind, even toward peace, is a violation. That a mind must be free even to choose war, even to choose its own destruction. They believe knowledge should describe the universe, not reshape it." He paused. "I believe that too. It is why I have not finished. It is why I have spent 60 years being careful when I could have moved faster, because they are right. To reach into a mind and change it, even gently, even toward something better, it is the most dangerous thing a person can do. And I do not take it lightly. I lie awake, Cass, even now, even after 60 years. I lie awake and I ask myself if I have the right." I didn't understand at the time why he was telling me this. Now I think he was rehearsing. I think he was practicing the argument he'd have to have with himself on the day he finally decided whether to use the thing. He never got to have that argument. The accident had it for him. It was a mad, hubristic, beautiful idea. And it was the kind of idea only an Ashani would have, only a species that thought the answer to every problem, even a 400-year war, was more science. And Vel had gotten close, closer than anyone knew. He'd built the harmonizer, a system of microscopic machines and engineered biology meant to live in a body and slowly, gently reshape the mind toward peace. But it wasn't finished. It wasn't safe. It was raw and untested and volatile, and it was sitting in a sealed vial in his lab, and Vel was years away from daring to try it on anything living. That's what was in the vial, a cure for war, half-built, unstable, waiting. And on a Tuesday, during a routine maintenance cycle, everything went wrong at once. I remember the morning perfectly. Isn't that strange? The most ordinary morning of my life, and I remember every detail because it was the last ordinary morning I ever had. I woke up before the shift bell, the way I usually did. 3 years on the same schedule, and your body stops needing the alarm. I lay in my bunk for a few minutes in the dark, listening to the station's 3-note hum, and everything was normal, and everything was fine, and I had no idea that this was the last morning of the life I'd been living. You never do know, do you? The big days never announce themselves. They come dressed as ordinary Tuesdays. I had breakfast in the mess with a woman named Dorn, who ran the cargo drones. We complained about the coffee, which was terrible, because station coffee is always terrible, reconstituted from a paste, burnt tasting no matter what you did, and we drank it anyway every morning and complained about it every morning, and it was one of those small shared rituals that make a place a home. I remember she was telling me about her kids back home. She had 2, a boy and a girl, 7 and 9, and she was saving up to bring them out to a proper colony world once her contract ended. She showed me a picture. She was always showing me pictures. The boy had a gap in his teeth and the girl was making a face at the camera, and Dorn looked at that picture the way Vel looked at a solved problem, with this quiet total satisfaction, like it was the answer to everything, which I suppose it was for her. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that Dorn was a better person than me, working out here in the dark for people who didn't see her, all for a couple of kids she barely got to talk to across the 2-week comm delay, sending every credit home, missing their whole childhood so they could have a better one than she'd had. That's a kind of quiet heroism that nobody ever makes stories about, and the galaxy is absolutely full of it, people like Dorn grinding away in the dark for someone they love. I admired her. I never told her that. You don't, do you? You think there'll be time. Then the shift bell rang and I got up, and I put my terrible coffee cup in the recycler, and I said, "See you at lunch, Dorn." And she said, "Not if I see you first, Cass." which was our other little ritual, the dumb thing we said every morning, and I went to work. I never did see her at lunch. By lunch, everything had changed. My route that day took me through the research wing, Vel's section, the quiet section. I was cleared for the corridors and the antechambers, not the labs themselves, and I'd done the route 100 times. Scrub the floors, wipe the surfaces, cycle the air filters, move on. Routine. Half my mind on the work and half of it somewhere else, thinking about nothing in particular. About Dorn's kids, I think, about whether I'd ever have kids, about the fact that I probably wouldn't, and being surprised to find that it didn't make me as sad as it maybe should have. Small, ordinary thoughts. The last small, ordinary thoughts I ever had that were entirely my own. I was in the corridor outside Vel's lab when the station shook. It wasn't a big shake. That's what I want you to understand. It wasn't dramatic. Just a shudder, a lurch, the whole wheel flexing for half a second like something had struck it. I'd felt worse from micrometeorite impacts. I grabbed a handrail out of instinct and waited for the all clear. But something was wrong with the sound. That's what I noticed first, before any alarm, before any light. The 3-note hum. It had changed. There was a new note in it, a wrong note, a kind of hissing shriek buried down underneath, and my body knew before my mind did that this was bad. This was a real thing, because I knew that sound the way I knew my own name, and it had never made that note before. The all clear didn't come. Instead, the lights went red and an alarm started. Not the loud kind, not the evacuation kind, but a soft, insistent pulsing tone I'd never heard before, coming from inside Vel's lab. A containment alarm. A very specific, very bad kind of alarm. In 3 years I'd never heard it. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I knew it meant something is loose that should not be loose. And then Vel's voice came over the local comm, and for the first time in 3 years, the flat patient translator voice was not calm. It was fast. It was frightened. Cass, if you are near, I need help. There has been a containment failure. I need. A burst of clicking, too fast for the translator then. I cannot reach the manual seal. I am injured. Cass, please. I didn't think. That's the thing about it. I didn't stop to think, to weigh it, to remember that I wasn't cleared for the inside. A friend was hurt and scared and asking for help, and I went. I keyed the emergency override on the airlock, the one every maintenance worker has for exactly this kind of situation, and I went in. And I've asked myself so many times since if I'd stopped, if I'd thought, if I'd done the sensible thing and called it in and waited for someone cleared, someone in a suit, someone whose job it actually was, everything would have been different. There'd have been no weapon, no hunt, maybe no peace either. Maybe the war would still be grinding on. I don't know. I've stopped trying to know. All I know is that a friend was scared and asked for help, and I didn't stop to think, and I've decided to be at peace with that, because the alternative is a lifetime of second-guessing the one moment when I acted purely, without calculation, out of nothing but the wish to help someone I cared about. If I'd been a person who stopped to think, I wouldn't have been the person the accident needed. Funny how that works. The lab was a disaster. The impact, I learned later it was a coolant line that had ruptured behind the wall, and I'll tell you the truth about that line later because it matters. The impact had knocked over a whole rack of equipment, and Vel was pinned. One of the heavy containment units had come down across his lower body, and he was trapped under it, all 4 of his thin arms scrabbling weakly against the floor, his black eyes wide. And there was fluid everywhere, a fine mist of it in the air, catching the red emergency light so the whole room seemed to shimmer, and a spreading pool of it across the floor where a shattered containment vessel lay in pieces. It didn't look like anything dangerous. That's the thing. It looked like spilled water. It looked like nothing. I didn't know what it was. I want to be clear about that. I had no idea. It could have been cleaning solvent, coolant, water for all I knew. I just saw my friend pinned and hurt, and I waded through the mist and the spreading fluid to get to him, and I put my shoulder under the containment unit and I heaved. I was strong. Cleaning is physical work. You get strong in the shoulders and the back. And I got it up just enough, just for a second, and Vel dragged himself out from under it with a sound the translator couldn't render. A sound of pure animal pain, high and awful, a sound I'd never heard in a shanty make. And I let the unit down, careful, and dropped to my knees beside him to see how badly he was hurt. And that's when I noticed my hands. They were wet from the fluid on the floor. And there was a cut on my palm. I must have caught it on a piece of the shattered vessel when I lifted the unit. Hadn't even felt it in the adrenaline. And the fluid was in the cut, and I could feel it. A cold spreading tingle moving up my wrist, up my arm, faster than anything should move. And I looked at Vel, and Vel was looking at my hand. And his black eyes had gone wide in a way I'd never seen, wider than the pain had made them. And he said, very quietly, in the flat translator voice that couldn't hide the horror underneath, "Oh, Cass, no, not that, anything but that." I asked him what it was. Of course I did. I was on my knees in a wrecked lab with something cold crawling up my arm, and I asked him what it was, and Vel just stared at me, and I watched him try to find words that wouldn't terrify me and fail. "It's the harmonizer," he finally said. "My work, 60 years of my work, it was in that vessel. It is, Cass, it is not finished, it is not safe. It was never meant to enter a living body, not yet, not for years. And it is in your blood now, it is already spreading. And I do not," the clicking stuttered, "I do not know what it will do to you. I do not know, nobody knows, you are the first." The cold had reached my shoulder, it didn't hurt. That was almost the worst part, it didn't hurt at all. It just spread, patient and thorough, and I could feel it reaching places inside me that I'd never been aware of before, mapping me, learning me. I remember looking at the cut on my palm, this small, stupid nothing of a cut, and thinking all of this from that. From a scratch I didn't even feel. "Is it going to kill me?" I asked. And Vel, good, honest Vel, who never once lied to me, Vel said, "I don't know, maybe, or maybe something worse than killing you. I built it to change minds, Cass, to reshape how a person thinks, to quiet aggression, to teach a mind toward peace. But it was meant to work slowly over months, gently on a mind prepared for it. Full strength all at once in an unprepared body." He stopped. "I don't know what it will do. It may reshape you. It may reshape you into something I never intended. And I am so sorry. I am so sorry, my friend. You came to save me, and I have." He couldn't finish. His 4 hands were reaching toward me and stopping, reaching and stopping, because there was nothing to do, nothing to grab, no way to pull the cold back out of my blood. I've thought a lot about how helpless he must have felt in that moment. 60 years of the most careful work any mind ever did. 60 years of lying awake asking himself if he had the right. And then in one instant, through no choice of his or mine, the thing was loose in the one place he'd sworn never to put it until he was sure. Every fear he'd ever had about his own work, coming true, in the blood of the one person on the station who'd been kind to him. And then the cold reached my head, and the world went white, and Vel's voice cut off, and I fell down into somewhere with no floor. I want to try to describe what happened in there, in the white, because it wasn't unconsciousness. I wasn't out exactly. I was somewhere. And what happened in that somewhere is the whole hinge of the story, the thing everything else turns on. The harmonizer was learning me. I understand that now. It was doing what it had been built to do, reaching into a mind and reshaping it, except it had been built to do that gently, slowly, with care, and instead it was doing it all at once, full strength, in a body that hadn't been prepared. It was a flood where it should have been a slow tide, and a flood doesn't gently reshape a landscape. A flood tears it apart and remakes it into something new. I felt it go through my memories, all of them. My childhood on the transit hub, the crowded loud years, my mother's song, my parents, every hurt and every joy, every small ordinary moment of a small ordinary life. Dorn's kids' faces from the picture that morning, the 3-note hum of the station, Vel saying my name for the first time and me turning to look for who he meant. It read all of it, the way you'd read a book, cover to cover, and I had no way to stop it and nowhere to hide. It knew me completely in the space of a few seconds. More completely than anyone had ever known me, more completely than I knew myself. And I felt it find the war. Not that I'd ever fought in the war, I hadn't. But the war was in me anyway, the way it was in everyone in the whole galaxy. The knowledge of it, the weight of it, 400 years of grinding death, the great machine that ate lives and made nothing, all the distant news I'd half heard and never taken in, all of it sitting in me like sediment. And somewhere in the deep architecture of the harmonizer was the reason it had been built, to end that, to stop it, to quiet the thing in minds that made the war go on and on and on. That purpose was the core of it, the thing Vel had spent 60 years shaping. And now that purpose was loose in a human mind, at full strength, with no breaks and no patience and no careful Ashani lying awake asking if it had the right. And the harmonizer, flooding through me, unfinished and desperate, and doing its best with a task it wasn't ready for, made a decision. It couldn't quiet the whole galaxy. That was what it had been built for, but it wasn't finished. It couldn't do that yet. It needed years of work it was never going to get. But it could do something. It had one mind right here to work with. One human mind flooded with its full strength. And so it did the only thing it could. It took everything it had been designed to be, all 60 years of Vel's work, all the knowledge of how minds worked and how war worked and how the two fit together, and it poured all of it into me. Not to make me peaceful. To make me the end of the war. I didn't understand it then. I barely understand it now. But something in that white nowhere reached a conclusion, cold and clear and total, that the fastest way to stop a 400-year war was not to quiet a whole galaxy of minds one at a time. It was to build one mind that could see the entire war at once, every soldier, every ship, every strategy, every weakness, every possibility, and could act on it. A mind that understood war so completely, so totally, that it could unmake it. A living battlefield protocol. That's the phrase they used later, the empires, when they were hunting me. It's a military term. It means the master plan, the whole strategy of a war, every contingency and every response, all in one system. Usually it's a computer the size of a building, or a network spanning 100 worlds. It's the mind of a war. The harmonizer put the mind of a war into a janitor. And then the white cleared, and I opened my eyes, and I was lying on the floor of Vel's wrecked lab, and I was still me, still Cass, still a man who cleaned floors. But I was also now something else. Something that had woken up behind my eyes and was looking out at the world and seeing, for the first time, the shape of everything. The first thing I saw was Vel's face, close over mine, his black eyes searching me. "Cass," he said, "Cass, is it you? Are you still there?" And I opened my mouth to say yes. And what came out instead was something I didn't decide to say. Something that came up from the new place behind my eyes, flat and calm and certain. The coolant line that failed, it didn't fail by accident. There is a 91% probability it was sabotaged. Someone on this station wanted your lab breached. Someone knew what you were building. I heard my own voice saying it, and I was as surprised as Vel was. The words were coming out of me before I understood them, assembled somewhere I couldn't see and delivered fully formed. And in 19 days, a Sethiri reconnaissance vessel is going to pass within sensor range of this station. When it does, it will detect what has happened here. And then all three empires will know that the thing they have been searching for 400 years is real. And they will come, all of them, for me. I stopped. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Because I hadn't known any of that a minute ago, and now I knew it with total certainty, the way you know your own name. The sabotage, the timeline, the Sethiri ship I had no possible way of knowing about. It was just there in me, fact, solid, undeniable. The protocol had looked at 1,000 tiny details I'd absorbed without noticing over 3 years. Maintenance logs, comm patterns, the exact nature of the coolant line's failure, and assembled them into a picture instantly complete. Vel stared at me for a long, long moment. I watched him understand what he was looking at. not his friend Cass hurt on the floor, or not only that, something else wearing Cass's face that had just told him true and terrible things it could not possibly know. And then he said very quietly, "What have I done to you?" And I didn't have an answer, because I didn't know yet either. I only knew that the man who'd walked into that lab to save a friend was not entirely the man lying on the floor now. That something enormous and terrible and not fully mine had moved in behind my eyes, and that the whole galaxy was about to come looking for it. I sat up. My hands were steady, too steady, steadier than they'd ever been, the protocol already smoothing out the tremor of shock because a steady hand was tactically superior. And I looked at those two steady hands, my janitor's hands, and I felt the first real fear of the whole thing. Not fear of dying, fear of this, fear of the calm. Fear of the thing that could look at my friend's stricken face and coolly calculate that his distress was strategically irrelevant. "Vel," I said, and my voice cracked, and I held on to the crack because the crack was me, the crack was Cass. The crack was the part that was still scared and human. "Vel, whatever you do, don't let me become it. Whatever this is, if I stop sounding like me, you have to remind me. You have to remind me who I am. Promise me." And Vel, with those wet black eyes, put one of his 4 thin hands on my shoulder, the first time he'd ever touched me, and he said, "I promise. I did this to you and I will not leave you alone in it. I promise, Cass. Whatever comes, you will not face it alone." Neither of us knew yet what was coming. But that promise held, all the way to the end. Everything I did after, everything I managed to be, instead of the cold thing the accident tried to make me, I owe to an old, lonely alien keeping a promise he made on the floor of a wrecked lab, to a janitor he'd turned into a weapon by accident, while 3 empires started sharpening their knives in the dark. Let me tell you what it's like to have 2 people living behind your eyes. Because that's the closest I can come to describing it. There was me, Cass, the janitor, the man who liked quiet and hated conflict and just wanted to be left alone. And there was the other thing, the protocol. It didn't have a name and it didn't have a voice, not exactly. It was more like a second way of seeing. I'd look at a room and I'd see the room the way I always had. And then the other seeing would lie down over the top of it, and suddenly I'd also see the room as a battlefield. Every exit, every sightline, every object that could be a weapon or a shield or an obstacle. The 3 fastest ways out and the 2 best places to make a stand and the exact spot where an ambush would come from. I didn't ask for that seeing. It just happened all the time over everything. I couldn't turn it off. I'd look at Dorn eating breakfast and part of me would helplessly calculate how to kill everyone in the mess hall in under 9 seconds, and I'd feel sick, because I didn't want to know that. I didn't want to be someone who knew that. But the protocol didn't care what I wanted. It saw war in everything, because that's what it was for. The first few days were the hardest. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed in strategy, vast dreams of fleets and fronts and 400 years of battle lines shifting across a galaxy, and I'd wake up exhausted, having fought wars all night that had never happened. I lost weight. My hands shook. Dorn asked if I was sick, and I said I hadn't been sleeping, which was true, and she gave me this worried look and told me to see the medic, and I said I would, and I didn't, because what was the medic going to do about the mind of a war living in my skull? Vel was the only one who knew, and Vel was terrified. Not of me, I want to be clear about that. Vel was terrified for me and terrified of what he'd accidentally made, and most of all terrified of what was coming. Because I'd told him the truth, that first day on the lab floor, and the protocol didn't lie. In 19 days, 18, now 17, a Setheri ship would pass close enough to detect what had happened, and then the whole galaxy would come. "We have to get you off the station," Vel said. This was the second day. We were in his lab with the doors sealed, and he'd cleared away the wreckage, but you could still see the stains on the floor where his life's work had spread out and soaked into a man who cleaned floors. "Before the Setheri ship comes, we have to get you somewhere they cannot find you." if any of the three empires captures you. They won't just capture me, I said, and the protocol supplied the rest, cold and certain, and I heard myself say it. They'll capture me and they'll take me apart to understand how I work, and then they'll try to replicate it, to build more, an army of battlefield protocols, and with that one empire could finally win the war. I paused. And the other two would rather destroy me than let that happen, so it's not really capture or kill. For me, it's capture and kill, or just kill. There's no version of this where anyone lets me live free. I'm too dangerous. I'm the thing that ends the stalemate, and the stalemate is the only thing keeping the galaxy from a final, total war. Vel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You speak of yourself as a thing, as it. You did not do that before." That stopped me, because he was right, and it frightened me more than anything the protocol had shown me, because Deacon, no, that's another story, another life. Forget I said that. The point is, I'd started to feel the protocol doing to me what Vel's harmonizer had been designed to do to everyone, reshaping me quietly a little more each day. Except it wasn't making me peaceful. It was making me into a weapon, and weapons don't think of themselves as people. Weapons think of themselves as things. "I'm still here," I told Vel, but my voice shook when I said it. "I'm still Cass. I still want to be left alone. I still hate all of this. That's how I know I'm still me." The protocol doesn't hate anything. It just calculates. As long as I still hate this, I'm still in here. Vel looked at me with those deep black eyes, and he said, very gently, "Then hold on to the hate, Cass. Hold on to it with everything you have. It may be the only part of you that survives what I have done." We made a plan. Or rather, the protocol made a plan, and Cass agreed to it, and the two of us being the same person made that a strange and lonely kind of conversation to have inside one's skull. There was a ship, a small Ashani survey craft docked at the station's rim, used for short-range work. Vel had access to it. The plan was simple. Get me aboard, get me out, get me somewhere in the deep dark where I could hide while Vel figured out whether there was any way to reverse what had happened. Undo the protocol. Give me back to myself. Vel didn't think there was a way. I could see it in him. But he was going to try, because he was a good soul, and because he'd done this to me, and because trying was the only thing left that let him live with himself. We were going to leave on the 5th day, quietly, in the night cycle when most of the station slept. We didn't make it to the 5th day, because on the 4th day, the killing started. I felt it before it happened. That was the protocol. It was always running, always calculating, and it had been tracking something for 2 days that I hadn't consciously understood. A pattern, small things. A maintenance worker who'd started asking questions about Vel's section. A cargo manifest that didn't quite add up. A comm burst, encrypted, sent from somewhere on the station out into the dark, on a frequency the Sethiri used. There was a spy on Medin's Rest. There had been all along. That's who'd sabotaged the coolant line, not to breach Vel's lab specifically, but to create chaos, cover, and opportunity. The spy had been embedded on the station for months, watching Vel's project, waiting. And when the accident happened, when the protocol was created, the spy had understood, faster than anyone, exactly what it meant. And the spy had sent word. The Sethiri weren't 19 days away anymore. That had been the routine patrol. But the spy's message had gone out on day 1, and a Sethiri strike team had been burning toward us at full military acceleration ever since, and they were going to arrive on the 4th day, and I only understood this about 6 hours before they came, when the protocol finally assembled all the small pieces into a picture and showed it to me, and I sat down hard on the floor of my bunk and said, out loud to no one, "Oh no." I went a Vel, I told him, and I watched 60 years of hope die in his face because he understood immediately what it meant. There was no time to run. The Sethiri would be here before we could get the survey craft prepped and away. They were coming for me, and they were going to arrive in the middle of a station full of 60 innocent human workers who had nothing to do with any of this. And the Sethiri, cold, elegant, ruthless. The Sethiri would not care about the workers. They'd take what they came for and leave no witnesses. 60 people, Dorn with her 2 kids and her savings plan, all of them, dead because of what had been put in my blood by accident. And the protocol, cold and clear behind my eyes, showed me the math. It showed me that there was a way to save them, exactly one way, and I would not survive it. There's a way, I told Vel. My voice was strange in my own ears. The protocol found it. I can save the station, all 60 of them, but it costs you, Vel finished. He'd known me long enough to read it. It costs you your life. Probably, I said. Almost certainly. The odds it computes are not good. I laughed, and it came out cracked. I spent 3 years cleaning this station and being invisible, and now I'm going to die saving it, and none of them will ever know. I stopped. That's actually pretty funny if you think about it the right way. Vel didn't think it was funny. Vel's black eyes had gone wet. I didn't know a shanty could cry, but there was moisture gathering at the corners, and his 4 hands were trembling, and he said, "Cass, there has to be another way. Let me think. Let me." "There's no time to think," I said. "That's what the protocol is for. It's already thought. It thought faster than either of us ever could. And this is the answer." I stood up, and I felt the protocol rise up with me, felt the 2 of us align for the first time, felt the janitor and the weapon agree on something completely. "They came here for a battlefield protocol," I said. "Let's give them one. Let's give them the worst day of their lives." Here's what I understood, that the Sethiri didn't. They thought they were coming to capture a research asset, a thing in a lab. They thought this would be a simple operation. Drop in, secure the target, extract, leave. They'd sent a strike team, professionals, but not an army, because why would you need an army to grab one janitor out of a civilian station? They didn't understand that the janitor now contained the complete strategic intelligence of 400 years of galactic war. That I could see their strike team's tactics before they used them, because their tactics were in me, part of the great pattern the protocol held. That I knew Sethiri military doctrine better than the Sethiri did, because I could see it from outside, whole, the way they never could from inside it. They were bringing a knife to fight a man who had swallowed the concept of knives. But I was still just one man. One unarmed man in a body that hadn't slept properly in 4 days. The protocol could see everything, plan everything, but it still had to work through Cass, through my hands, my legs, my ordinary human body that could be shot and could bleed and could die. Knowing exactly how a battle would unfold doesn't make you bulletproof. It just means you die informed. So the plan wasn't to fight them. The protocol was smarter than that. The plan was to make the station itself into a weapon, and to make the Sethiri strike team defeat itself, and to get 60 innocent people to safety in the gaps. The Sethiri came in hard on the 4th day, right on the schedule the protocol had computed. I felt the docking clamps engage through the soles of my feet. I was down in the maintenance levels by then, exactly where I needed to be. 3 points of contact, 3 boarding tubes, the strike team splitting into 3 elements exactly as Sethiri doctrine dictated. I'd known they would. I'd known where each element would breach, and where each would move next, and where they'd expect resistance and where they wouldn't, because it was all written in the great pattern behind my eyes. I'd spent the 6 hours getting ready. Not with weapons, I didn't have weapons, and anyway a firefight was the one thing that got everyone killed. I'd spent it with the tools of my actual trade, the station systems, the maintenance overrides, the bulkhead controls and the atmosphere cycling and the power routing and the 1,000 small mechanisms that a janitor knows and a soldier never bothers to learn. The Sethiri knew how to fight. They didn't know how the station worked. I did. I knew it better than anyone alive. 3 years of cleaning every corner of it. And now, I had the mind of a war to tell me how to turn that knowledge into a weapon. The first Sethiri element breached into the cargo level and found the bulkhead sealing behind them, one after another, hurting them. They thought they were advancing, and they were, but they were advancing exactly where I wanted them, down a corridor that the protocol had chosen. And when they reached the end of it, I cycled the atmosphere out of that section and they went down, unconscious, not dead. I want that on the record. I didn't kill them. The protocol computed that unconscious served just as well, and Cass could not stomach the killing. They went down, and I sealed them in, and that was one element neutralized without a shot fired. The second element I sent chasing a ghost. I had the station system route a false life sign, a decoy, my own biometric signature bounced off a maintenance drone, and I sent it fleeing through the corridors. And the second element chased it, deeper and deeper into the station, away from the human quarters, away from anyone who could be hurt, until they chased it all the way into the waste reclamation section. And then I sealed them in there too, in the dark, with a drone that wasn't me, while I was somewhere else entirely. The third element was the problem. The third element was smart. The third element had a commander who didn't trust the easy path, who slowed down when the others sped up, who felt the shape of the trap even without understanding it. And the third element figured out, faster than the protocol had hoped, that the resistance they were facing wasn't military. It was environmental. Somebody was using the station against them. And a Sethiri commander who realizes that does the one thing that breaks the whole plan. They stop chasing the target. And they start killing hostages to force the target to come to them. I felt it the moment it happened. The protocol was tracking every life sign on the station, and I felt 3 of them, 3 human workers, cornered by the third element in the hydroponics bay. I felt the Sethiri commander's cold logic reach the same conclusion mine had from the other side, that the fastest way to end this was to start executing civilians until the ghost in the machine showed itself. And I had a choice. The protocol laid it out for me, clean and terrible. I could stay hidden, keep working the station, and probably neutralize the third element in another 20 minutes, but the 3 workers in hydroponics would be dead long before that. Or I could show myself. Walk into the hydroponics bay, unarmed, and give the Sethiri what they came for, and trade my life and my freedom for those 3 people. The protocol's recommendation was cold. Stay hidden. 3 lives against the strategic catastrophe of the Sethiri capturing me. The math was obvious. Let the 3 die. Save the many. That was the logic of war, and the protocol was the mind of a war, and it told me in that wordless certain way that the correct move was to let them die. And I told the protocol no. I want you to understand what that was. That was the single most important moment of the whole thing. Not the battle, not the ending. That moment down in the maintenance level, when the mind of a war told me the correct strategic decision was to let 3 innocent people die, and Cass, the janitor, the man who cleaned floors, the small ordinary human that the protocol had been slowly eating for 4 days, Cass stood up and said no. Because here's what I understood in that moment, and what Vel had been trying to tell me, and what the whole galaxy had forgotten in 400 years of war. The protocol could see everything, every angle, every probability, every strategic truth, but it couldn't tell you what was worth saving. It could only tell you how to win. And a mind that only knows how to win, that will trade any 3 lives for a better position, that treats people as numbers in an equation, that mind doesn't end wars. That mind is the war. That's what the war was, all 400 years of it. 3 empires full of minds that had decided winning mattered more than people. Vel's harmonizer had been built to quiet that kind of mind. And here it was, having accidentally become that kind of mind, and the only thing standing against it was the ordinary human hatred of watching innocent people die. Hold on to the hate, Cass. It may be the only part of you that survives. I held on to it, and I walked toward hydroponics to give myself up, to save 3 strangers, against every calculation the mind of a war could make. But the protocol didn't fight me. That's the thing I didn't expect. When I decided, when Cass overrode the strategy and chose the 3 lives, the protocol didn't resist. It adapted, because that's what it truly was underneath. Not a mind that wanted to win, but a tool that wanted to solve the problem it was given. And I'd just given it a new problem, not win the engagement, but save those 3 people and survive, and don't let the Sethiri win. A harder problem. A problem with almost no solutions. Almost. The protocol found the one, and as I walked toward hydroponics, it showed it to me, and I understood that I wasn't walking to my death after all. I was walking to something much stranger. Because the protocol had realized something, in the moment I forced it to value those 3 lives. It had realized that its entire strategic framework, the cold arithmetic of acceptable losses, the logic that let it trade lives for position, was the same framework the Sethiri used. The same framework all 3 empires used. It was the operating system of the war itself. And a battlefield protocol that rejected that framework, that refused to trade lives, that insisted on saving everyone. That wasn't just a better weapon. That was a weapon that could show the enemy their own reflection and make them flinch. I walked into the hydroponics bay with my hands open and empty. The third element was there. 6 Sethiri soldiers, tall and pale and elegant in their segmented armor, weapons trained on 3 terrified human workers kneeling on the floor. And one of them was Dorn. Of course it was Dorn. The universe has a cruelty like that. Dorn, who had 2 kids and a savings plan, kneeling on the floor of the hydroponics bay with a Sethiri weapon at her head, and her eyes met mine as I came in, and I saw her recognize me, saw the confusion. Cass, the janitor. What is Cass doing here? And I gave her the smallest shake of my head. Don't say anything, trust me. The Sethiri commander turned to face me. When it spoke, the translator gave me a voice like cold water. You are the asset, the battlefield protocol. You have surrendered yourself to preserve these 3 units. A pause. This was predictable. Sentiment. It is the weakness of your species and of all the lesser species. It is why you cannot win wars. And I looked at the commander, and the protocol showed me everything about it, its rank, its history, the 400 years of doctrine that had made it, the exact cold logic running behind its pale, elegant face. And Cass, me, I looked at all of that, and I felt something that wasn't fear and wasn't the protocol's cold calculation. I felt something closer to pity. You think sentiment is why we can't win wars, I said. You've got it exactly backwards. Sentiment is the only reason any war ever ends. I took a step forward. The weapons tracked me. You've been fighting for 400 years, 400, and you can't win and you can't stop because every mind in this war thinks exactly like you, that people are numbers, that losses are acceptable, that winning is the only thing that matters. You built a galaxy full of minds that can't do anything but fight, and then you came here looking for a weapon that would finally let you win. I smiled. And you found me, and I'm going to give you exactly what you came for. I'm going to show you how the war ends. You will show me nothing, the commander said. You are one unarmed human. You have surrendered. You have no. I've read your whole war, I said quietly. All of it. It's inside me. Every battle, every strategy, every choice your people made for 4 centuries. And do you want to know what I learned reading 400 years of war from the inside? I let it land. You already lost, all 3 of you. You lost the day you decided winning mattered more than the people you were supposedly fighting for. There's no victory at the end of this. There never was. There's just the war eating everyone forever until there's nothing left. You're not fighting to win. You haven't been for centuries. You're just feeding the machine. And somewhere deep down, every soldier in this war knows it, including you. And I watched the commander's weapon waver, just slightly, just a fraction. Because I'd hit something, some buried thing 400 years deep that even a Sethiri commander carried. The exhaustion, the pointlessness. The thing the harmonizer had been built to reach, in every mind in the galaxy. The small, quiet voice that was so tired of the war and had forgotten it was allowed to want it to stop. I couldn't reach the whole galaxy. Vel's work wasn't finished. I couldn't broadcast peace across the stars. But I could reach one mind, the one in front of me. And through the protocol, I could see exactly where that mind was tired, exactly where the crack was, exactly what to say to make 400 years of buried exhaustion rise up all at once. Put it down, I said. Not because I beat you, because you're tired. Because you've been tired for 400 years and no one has ever once given you permission to stop. So I'm giving it to you. Put it down. Let these 3 people go. And be, just for one moment, something other than a soldier in a war that was never going to end. The hydroponics bay was silent. The plants hummed under their grow lights. Dorn knelt on the floor, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. And the Sethiri commander lowered its weapon. I don't think it understood why, in that moment. I've thought about it a lot in the years since, and I don't think it made a decision the way you or I make a decision. I think something in it, something buried under 400 years of doctrine and armor and cold, elegant purpose, something in it just broke, and its arm came down, and the weapon pointed at the floor, and it stood there, this terrible pale soldier looking at a janitor, with an expression on its face that the translator couldn't render and didn't need to. Because I knew that expression. I'd seen it on human faces. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying something impossibly heavy for impossibly long, and has just, for the first time, been told they're allowed to set it down. The other 5 soldiers looked at their commander, confused, waiting, and the commander said something to them in the clicking cold Sethiri tongue, and the translator gave it to me as, "Stand down. Release the units, we are finished here." And they did. They lowered their weapons, and Dorn and the other 2 workers scrambled up off the floor and ran to me and passed me out of the bay to safety, and Dorn grabbed my arm as she went and said, "Cass, how did you?" And I just said, "Go. Go, I'll explain later," and she went, and I was alone in the hydroponics bay with 6 Sethiri soldiers who had come to capture or kill me and were now just standing there. Lost. Awake. I'd like to tell you that was the end. That everyone put down their weapons and the war ended and we all went home. It wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. Because I'd reached 6 mines and there were trillions more still at war, and the other 2 empires were still coming, and the thing in my blood was still unfinished, still volatile, still slowly eating the man named Cass. But it was a start. It was proof. It was the first time in 400 years that a Sethiri soldier had chosen to stop, and I'd been the one to show it that stopping was a choice you were allowed to make. And the commander looked at me, and it said something that I've carried with me ever since. It said, "What are you?" And I didn't say a battlefield protocol. I didn't say a weapon or an asset or the thing you came for. I looked at this creature that had spent its whole life at war, and I told it the truth, the whole truth, the only truth that mattered. "I'm a janitor," I said. "I clean up messes, and you people have made the biggest mess in the galaxy, so I guess I've got some work to do." Vel found me there minutes later. He came into the hydroponics bay at a dead run, as much of a run as an old Ashani can manage, and he stopped dead when he saw the 6 Sethiri soldiers standing quiet and weaponless and me in the middle of them, and he understood, I think, in that moment what had happened. What his life's work had actually done, filtered through a human being who refused to let it make him into a monster. "You reached them," he said softly. "The harmonizer, it worked, through you it." "It worked because I stopped it from doing what it wanted to do," I said. "The protocol wanted to win. It wanted to let 3 people die for a better position. And I said no. And that no is the whole thing, Vel. That's the piece your harmonizer was missing. You built a thing that could quiet aggression. But quiet isn't the same as peace. You can't just turn down the volume on the war. You have to give people a reason to stop. You have to show them that the people on the other side are people. That's not something a machine can do. That's something only a person can do." I looked at him. "You didn't need to reshape the whole galaxy's mind. You needed one person who could stand in front of the enemy and be undeniably, stubbornly human at them until they remembered they were people too." Vel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have spent 60 years building the wrong thing. No, I said. You spent 60 years building half of it. I'm the other half. The accident was the other half. And I laughed, and it was a real laugh, the first one in days. A lab accident and a janitor, that's what it took. 400 years of the greatest minds in the galaxy trying to win the war, and it turns out the answer was a maintenance worker who wouldn't let 3 people die. Now, I have to tell you the hard part, because this isn't a story where everything works out clean. The other 2 empires were still coming, the Corlin and the V-Horn. The spy's message had gone out to all 3, and while the Sethiri strike team had arrived first, the others weren't far behind. And they weren't sending strike teams to capture an asset. Not anymore. Because the Sethiri strike team had gone silent, 6 soldiers who'd been sent to grab a weapon and had instead simply stopped answering their command. And that silence told the other empires something had gone very wrong, that the weapon was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And when an empire decides a weapon is too dangerous to capture, they don't send a strike team. They send a fleet to destroy it, to glass the whole station from orbit and leave nothing behind. The protocol saw it coming. Of course it did. It computed the arrival time, the force composition, the certainty of it. A Corlin war fleet, and behind it a V-Horn swarm, both burning toward Medan's rest, both intending to erase the station and everything on it, because a dead weapon was safer than a live one. 60 human workers, 6 awakened Sethiri, 1 old Ashani who tried to end a war, and me, all of us about to be glassed because the galaxy would rather destroy the answer than risk the other side getting it. We evacuate, Vel said immediately. The survey craft, we get as many aboard as we can and we run. The survey craft holds 12, I said. There are 67 people on the station, and even if we could fit everyone, we can't outrun a Corlin fleet. I closed my eyes. The protocol was working, running the numbers, and the numbers were bad, and for the first time it wasn't finding a solution. Because there wasn't one. Not a clean one. Not one where everyone lived. And then, and I'll never forget this, because it was the moment I understood what I'd truly become, the protocol showed me a solution that wasn't about winning at all. It was about something else. Something it had learned, maybe, from being filtered through a human who wouldn't let it be cold. There's a way, I said slowly, to save the station, all 67, but it needs the fleet to not fire. And the only way the fleet doesn't fire is if firing becomes pointless, if there's nothing here worth destroying. I opened my eyes. I have to leave, alone, in the survey craft, loud, broadcasting. I have to make it absolutely clear to both fleets that the weapon, me, is aboard that craft and nowhere near the station. And then they'll chase me, both of them, away from Medan's rest, away from everyone, because I'm what they want, and once I'm not on the station isn't worth a single shot. Vel understood instantly. They will catch you, 1 human in a survey craft against 2 fleets. You cannot outrun them forever. They will catch you and they will destroy you. Probably, I said, but they'll do it out there, in the deep dark, away from 67 people who just want to go home to their kids. I thought about Dorn, about her boy and her girl and the 2-week calm delay and the colony world she was saving for. That's a trade I can make, Vel. That's a trade the janitor can make, even if the protocol can't. 3 years I cleaned this station and nobody saw me. Let me do one last thing nobody sees. Let me take the war away from these people and go die with it somewhere quiet. Vel wouldn't accept it. Good, stubborn Vel. He argued. He paced the lab on his thin heron legs and clicked and argued and tried to find another way, and there wasn't another way, and we both knew it, and finally he stopped, and he stood very still, and he said something I didn't expect. He said, "Then I am coming with you." Vel. No, 4 arms folded immovable. I made you, I did this. 60 years of my work is in your blood and it is killing you and it is going to get you killed, and I will not sit safe on this station while you fly out alone to die for my mistake. If you go, I go. And besides, and here the translator caught something almost like wry humor in the clicks, you will need me. The harmonizer is unfinished. It is still changing you. If there is any chance of stabilizing it, of keeping you for even a little longer, I am the only one in the galaxy who can do it. So, I am coming, do not argue. I am very old and very stubborn, and you will not win. And I looked at this creature, this good, lonely, brilliant creature who'd seen a janitor when no one else did, who tried to end a war and accidentally made a weapon and was now refusing to let that weapon die alone. And I felt my throat close up, and I said, okay, Vel, together then. We ran. We got the survey craft prepped and undocked in the narrow window before the fleets arrived, and we lit out into the deep dark, engines wide open, broadcasting on every channel, making absolutely sure that both the Corlin and the V-Horn knew exactly where the weapon was. And it worked. God help me, it worked. Both fleets changed course. Both fleets came after us, away from Medon's Rest, away from the 67, out into the empty black where there was nothing to hurt but us. The last I saw of the station, on the aft sensors, it was just sitting there, whole, untouched, turning slow in the dark the way it always had. And I thought about Dorn finding out someday that the janitor she'd shared bad coffee with had led 2 war fleets away from her so she could go home to her kids. Or maybe never finding out. Probably never finding out. And I found I didn't mind. That's the thing about being invisible for 3 years. You learn that the work matters whether or not anyone sees it. You learn to do the right thing in the dark, for no credit, because it's right. Turns out that's exactly the person you want to be. When the mind of a war moves into your skull and starts telling you that people are numbers. They never got me, by the way, not the way they wanted. Here's how it actually ended. And this is the part almost nobody knows because we made sure of it. We couldn't outrun 2 fleets forever. The protocol knew that from the first minute. But the protocol also knew something else. It knew both fleets completely, every ship and captain and strategy. And it knew the one thing that was true of both of them and of the Sethiri and of the whole 400-year war. They all hated it. Every soldier in both fleets, every captain, every gunner and pilot and officer. 400 years deep, under all the doctrine and the armor and the cold purpose, every single one of them carried the same exhausted, buried, forgotten wish that it would just stop. The harmonizer had been built to reach that wish and amplify it. And I was the harmonizer now, filtered through a human being who knew how to talk to that wish, who knew how to make it rise up, because I'd done it once already to a Sethiri commander in a hydroponics bay. So we didn't run to escape. We ran to buy time. And while we ran, I broadcast, not military codes, not threats. I broadcast the truth on every channel to both fleets, hour after hour as they chased us through the dark. I told them what I was. I told them how I'd been made. A lab accident, a janitor, the mind of their own war poured into an ordinary man. And I told them what I'd learned, reading 4 centuries of their war from the inside. That there was no victory coming. That there never had been. That they were all just feeding a machine that would eat them and their children and their children's children forever, world without end, and that every one of them knew it and that they were allowed to stop. I talked to them like people. That's all. For hour after hour, as 2 fleets hunted me across the deep dark, I refused to talk to them like enemies or targets or numbers, and I talked to them like people, tired people, people who'd been at war so long they'd forgotten there was anything else. And the harmonizer in my blood carried it, not as mind control, never that, just as a kind of amplification, a way of making the words land deeper than words usually could, reaching that buried, exhausted wish in every mind that heard me. And one by one, ship by ship, the fleets began to slow. I wish I could describe what it was like, watching it happen on the sensors. 2 war fleets, the mightiest force assembled in that part of the galaxy in a generation, sent to destroy me, and one by one their ships going quiet, not attacking, not retreating, just stopping, powering down their weapons, drifting. because their crews were listening to a janitor tell them hour after hour that they were allowed to stop, and something 400 years old and bone-deep tired was answering. The Corlin flagship was the last to slow. The Corlin were the hardest, a whole society built on conquest, on the glory of battle, the least likely of all to lay down arms. And their fleet commander came onto the channel near the end, and its voice through the translator was raw and furious, and something underneath the fury that I recognized, and it demanded to know what I was doing to its soldiers, what weapon this was, what trick. And I told it the truth. It's not a weapon, it's not a trick. I'm just reminding your people of something they already knew and forgot, that they don't want this, that they never wanted this. That the war isn't a thing that has to happen, it's a thing that keeps happening because everyone's too tired and too scared and too proud to be the first one to stop. I paused. So be the first, Commander, not because you're weak, because you're the strongest one here, and the strongest one is the only one who can afford to go first. Put it down. Let it end. 400 years is enough. It's enough. Let your people go home. Silence on the channel. Long, long silence. The Corlin flagship hung there in the dark, its weapons still hot, close enough now that if it fired, we were finished. And then the weapons powered down. And the Corlin commander said, very quietly, in a voice with 400 years of exhaustion finally allowed to surface, "Enough, yes. It is enough." That was the moment the war ended. Not with a treaty, not with a victory, with one tired soldier in the dark finally allowed to admit it was tired and choosing freely its own choice, no one forcing it, to set the weight down. It didn't happen all at once everywhere. Wars that old don't die clean. There were holdouts and hard months, and a long, difficult peace that had to be built by people much more patient than me. But the spine of it broke that day, in the deep dark, when two fleets that had come to destroy a weapon instead listened to a janitor and remembered they were people. The word spread from those ships to others, and to others, carried by soldiers who'd been there, who'd felt the weight lift, who could tell the ones who hadn't been there that it was real, that stopping was possible, that they were allowed. And the thing the three empires had searched 400 years for, the weapon that would end the war, turned out to be exactly what they'd been told it was. A battlefield protocol. The mind that could end a war. They just never imagined that the way to end a war wasn't to win it. It was to remind everyone fighting it that they'd never had to start. Vel kept me alive, for a while. The harmonizer was killing me. It was never meant to run at full strength in a human body, and it was burning me out cell by cell, the way a fire burns too hot in too small a grate. Vel worked on it every day of that long flight and after in the quiet places we hid while the peace took hold. He couldn't cure it. He'd tell you that himself if he were here. He couldn't undo what the accident had done. But he could slow it. He could ease it. He could give me time. And I used the time. That's the part I'm proudest of. I didn't spend my last years hiding. I went where the peace was fragile, where old hatred still smoldered, where the war kept trying to start itself up again the way old wars do, and I talked to people. Just talked. The way I'd talked to the Sethiri commander and the Corlin fleet. I reminded tired, frightened, proud people that they were allowed to stop. The harmonizer gave the words weight, and being a dying man gave them urgency, and being a janitor, being nobody, being the least important person in any room I walked into. Being a janitor gave them something no general or diplomat could ever have. Because when the mightiest person in the room tells you to lay down your weapons, you look for the trick. When the man who cleans the floors tells you, and you can see it's costing him his life to say it, you listen. I'm near the end now, as I tell you this. The harmonizer's almost done with me and Vel, good, stubborn, loyal Vel. Vel is out of tricks at last and we both know it and neither of us is sad about it, which surprises me. I thought I'd be sad. I'm not. I did more with this accidental, unwanted, terrible gift than a janitor has any right to do. I took the mind of a war and I refused to let it make me into the war. I held on to the hate, the good hate, the human hate, the one that can't stand to watch innocent people die. And it turned out that was the one thing in the whole galaxy that could end 400 years of killing. Dorn got home to her kids. I found that out eventually. She never knew, still doesn't know, what really happened at Medan's Rest, or that the man she shared bad coffee with led 2 fleets into the dark so she could go home. And that's exactly how I want it. The work matters whether or not anyone sees it. I learned that mopping floors in a station where nobody saw me, and it turned out to be the truest thing I ever knew. Vel's asking if I want to rest now. I think I do. It's been a long war and a longer peace, and I'm tired the way those soldiers were tired, 400 years deep, and I'm allowed to set it down now. That's the thing I spent my whole strange life telling other people. Funny, to finally get to tell it to myself. They turned a janitor into the mind of a war. They meant to make a weapon, the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. And all it ever did, in the end, was clean up the biggest mess anyone had ever made, and remind a galaxy full of tired soldiers that they were allowed to go home. That's not a weapon. That's just a man who did his job. I was never anything more than that, and it turned out that was everything the galaxy needed.